We're about to start in a few seconds. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Si son tan amables de ir a sus asientos, por favor. Well, we hope you enjoyed the coffee break and had the opportunity to reconnect with colleagues and continue some of the conversations inspired by the morning sessions. Before moving on, I would like to briefly highlight an important aspect of this event. The third Med Sustainable Tourism Convention has been designed according to sustainability principles that seek to minimize its environmental footprint. Beyond the decision to eliminate printed materials, a number of additional measures have been implemented. In this regard, we would like to remind you that the carbon footprint of the convention will be calculated and compensated. To make this assessment as accurate as possible, we kindly ask for your collaboration. Through the event application, you will find a short questionnaire regarding your travel arrangements and journey to Barcelona. Completing this form only takes a few moments, yet it provides valuable information that allows us to better understand the real environmental impact of the event. Your participation is therefore essential. What we cannot measure, we cannot improve. And understanding the impact of our events is an important step towards designing more sustainable practices in the future. Thank you in advance for your collaboration. Now let us continue our program. The next session invites us to broaden the discussion and explore certain questions that many destinations around the world are currently asking themselves. Where is tourism heading? How can destinations remain attractive while ensuring quality of life for residents? How can tourism continue generating value while responding to growing environmental and social expectations? And perhaps most importantly, how can destinations reinvent themselves without losing their identity? How is the geopolitical context reshaping tourism reality? To address these questions, we are delighted to welcome three outstanding voices representing different perspectives within the tourism ecosystem. First, we are joined by Mr. José Antonio Donaire, Commissioner for Sustainable Tourism at the Municipality of Barcelona. Thank you. We are also honored to welcome Mrs. Alessandra Priante, President of the Italian National Tourist Board, who unfortunately couldn't join us in person, but will be kindly participating via streaming. And moderating this conversation is Mr. Tim Fairhurst, Director General of ITOA, the European Tourism Association, who will lead the conversation from now on. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Ivana. Just to say before we get going, Professoressa, thank you very much for joining us. I know in theory you were only available till 12:15, but you can push it till 12:30. Sorry we're late. Thanks for joining us. Can I quickly ask the room, could you raise your hand, please, if you're in the private... No, you've got the motor skills to raise your hand. That's good. It's a good start. So people in the private sector, put your hand up. Private sector? Ooh, I'm getting mid-single figures. Public sector?
Whoa.
Who are the rest of you? Maybe you're making use of the air conditioning. Okay, right. So we've got a public sector heavy audience, but that's good because I think tourism literacy is partly what this session's about. Poor Jose Antonio has crossed my path about 3 times in the last month at various events.
True.
So, we'll both be checking what each other's got to say. I'm going to say a few introductory remarks, then I'm going to sort of ask a question to Alessandra to get the ball rolling, and mindful that she doesn't have too long with us. But just to set the stage, we've had some general suggestions of what the big factors are that are in the minds of people whose job it is to get involved in policy that affects tourism. And I'm using that form of words specifically rather than tourism policy because, as Andrea and others were saying this morning, part of the challenge is to make sure that tourism is in mind when we do other things. Our colleague talking about visa facilitation, that's going to affect business travel, that's going to affect all kinds of things, and it's a competitive environment. Is the Schengen visa process as good as it is, say, for New Zealand or Australia, for people from India wishing to travel? Question mark. So there is a big competitive context. The European Commission would like to see the roughly 20% of visitors that come from outside the EU to grow. That's smart in the sense that that's quite high-value business. It's around about 40% of the value of international tourism in Europe, the stuff that comes from outside Europe. But, of course, it comes with an environmental footprint. So what can we do to maximize the benefit when they're here? And what can we do to mitigate the adverse impact? There was a mention of societal expectations, and those are changing. I think the way we talk about it is changing. I think some of the language is less tolerant. That's also reflected in politics generally. That's not unique to tourism. How we talk about the other and who we blame for our discontent, that language has changed a little, and it's certainly been exaggerated since COVID. Other people in our space is a more sensitive topic, no question. And it's really encouraging to see the real academic effort into getting some science behind this rather than just aggregated subjectivity. So I think before we get into the big picture of what does good look like, and both Alessandra and Jose Antonio will be talking about their own responsibilities, but really as a starting point to reflect more broadly on what the obstacles and opportunities are around governance that affects tourism. What is good like? How do we put a strategy together that's not just words? How to bridge the rhetoric and reality gap? So the one sort of fact I'd like us to remember, and I think, Claudio, you referenced it very clearly before the break, look at the demographic and economic drivers. Demand for tourism is growing. That is inescapable. More people can afford to travel. We can certainly talk about it, but I don't see any politically plausible route which says you can't come. How would you do it? You know, whether it's the rationing flights or just suddenly putting a huge price on inbound travel, what would be the competitive impact? Can you imagine trying to get that through? And the other big point I'd make is that this stuff is hard. I think local politicians have a really tough job with tourism. It's emotionally very charged. It's about identity. It's about feeling threatened. So how do you make decisions which we're going to be grateful for in 10 or 15, 20 years' time in the context of short-term electoral cycles? That's difficult. We need to understand that, and we need to lean into it. And by far the most educational day I've spent in the European Commission in the last 2 years was at a European roundtable on climate risk management. And the big takeaway was the problem is not finance or knowledge or technical competence. The problem is our institutional capacity to get decisions through. This stuff is hard. Maybe we're going to surface some things which are tricky, either because people don't want things to become more expensive. That's never an easy political sell. Or in some other way, we will have to change. So it's great that we've got two serious strategic thinkers to join us in this discussion. So Professoressa, welcome from Rome. Thank you so much for joining us. So I know that your previous role was Director for Europe for UN Tourism before taking over the leadership of the Italian National Tourism Organization. So I'm going to throw you a very big picture question. How do you go about defining what good looks like for tourism policy? And while you think about that or catch that particular ball, I'm going to relocate to a chair on the stage. So Alessandra, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tim. I hope you can hear me properly. Gracias.
Yes.
It was an absolute pleasure to accept this invitation and to participate in this conference. Thank you for the flexibility of allowing me to participate online. Unfortunately, days now are becoming really, really hectic here. I'm going to answer your question straightforwardly, saying there's no good policy. The policy is as good as it gets, considering the situation and considering the circumstances. What is very important is that the way that the policy is built is the real key to success. So the more the policy is shared, the more the policy is not changed every 5 years or every 4 years, every time there is a political change, the more the policy is a result of a collaboration between public and private, and the more the policy takes into consideration the desires and needs of the communities, the more the policy is good, which means it can change, it must change, it can evolve, it must evolve, but what should not change is the good way of making it. So I am honestly very tired of hearing metrics that refer to numbers, which refer to a quantitative measurement of tourism flows. We're not in the 1900s anymore. We're not counting heads anymore. We don't need to count heads anymore. What we must do is we must introduce new metrics. And the new metrics will influence our decisions, and our decisions will be good decisions if the new metrics include all that is coming out now, specifically from the qualitative versus AI world. So it is imperative that we don't postpone, that we stop talking over each other about the same things over and over again. Sustainability is an objective. In the moment it has KPIs attached to it that are relatable to MSMEs, SMEs, larger companies, and public administrations. Until it is measurable, applicable, and therefore we can actually make a progress on it, it becomes small effort, or the nice word that you put, oh, I'm very sustainable. So Spain is absolutely leading the way when it comes to commitment, and many other countries are doing that. I still think, and we think at NTO level, that sustainability for many of our government interlocutors must become more pragmatic, or simply other people are going to put it aside and they're going to substitute it with a word called responsible. So I know when it comes to Italy, there's always the usual questions of how many people and the so-called over-tourism and the flows and how do you distribute them and how do you de-season them and whatever. Reality is, I don't think there's more and more people that are willing to travel. I don't like the incrementative look at we will be X amount of billions in 2030 or 2040. It doesn't move anything for me. It doesn't change anything for me. What changes is the way that people travel and what we make them do and what they want to do. So how do we create that relationship in a way that they actually travel where we would like them to travel, which is going to help us in our strategies. So the beautiful thing about tourism is everything is a result of a conversation, of an ongoing conversation. And this is why I think it's a very exciting time to be drafting policies, but we have to do it correctly.
Great. Thank you very much for setting the scene so well. And I'm going to come back to what was implicit in your last statement about how do we influence behavior and who are the various stakeholders involved in that, from the travel industry to administration to each other. But to turn to Jose Antonio, let's use Barcelona as a case study because you've done a lot of work and there is a clear strategy which to begin with focuses on the supply side. So for those who don't know it, you might want to just talk through some of the main headlights. But responding to Alessandra's view on the collaborative nature of building that plan, building buy-in, trying to create something that's going to withstand the political weather. This is a long-term view, and it's a way of doing things rather than a specific target. Would you like to reflect on what you've heard and give some specifics around Barcelona?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the kind invitation. Well, I want to start by a critical concept that is limit. In my opinion, managing a destination means setting limits. Setting limits means painful. It's painful. For decades, the management of tourism, or the word most used on tourism, was more. More beds, more flights, more cruise calls, more catches. And as the city was infinite, but the city is not infinite. The water is finite, especially Mediterranean square. The public space is finite. The patience of the residents is finite. The housing is finite. Then we have to planning the city in terms of limits. And why? In my opinion, because when tourism crosses those limits, it does not only damage the tourism, the local population, it also damages the tourism model, because it destroys the city that people want to visit. That's why, in my opinion, to limit it's at the same time a local policy, a social policy, and an economic strategy for tourism, for better tourism. Then in Barcelona, as you probably know, according to our meetings before, we use different instruments to cap this tourism growing. For instance, in 2017, the city decided to freeze the number of accommodation beds. That's why, since 2017, the number of tourists in Barcelona remains stable. That's very interesting, because now nobody asks how is tourism in Barcelona according to the number of tourists, because we have more or less the same number of tourists this year than the year before. And that's why we analyze the health of tourism according to new KPIs, such as salaries, water consumption, flow, and so on. And even more, we have decided to eliminate, for this reason, every tourism apartment license by 2028, returning to the local community all these, to the residential market, to these flats. We are reducing the number of terminals in the port from 7 to 5, and we have decided to eliminate the transit calls in the harbor. All these measures are focused on a central idea, the concept of a limit. But now the painful part. Every one of those decisions creates a conflict. The accommodation cap produces a resistance by the sector, obviously. Apartment owners resist the 2028 deadline. The cruise industry resists the terminal reduction. Even some residents resist, because tourism, obviously, is also income and job for many families. And that's important. The decision to limit is a decision to take responsibility and to accept the cost of it. That's important in terms of consensus, of governability. Sometimes the decisions have to be against a part of the population in terms to preserve the general interest.
So I think that really illustrates what we were discussing and Alessandra's initial point, that you have to involve people, and that doesn't mean that everyone gets ice cream.
That's the point.
Right? That doesn't work. So how are you communicating the why of the decisions, rather than just some top-down, done, someone in City Hall, someone in the ministry decided, of course you're going to alienate people. This is a very messy, fragmented ecosystem. There's individual entrepreneurs, there's big multinationals, this is a complicated user group. We know we're a big trade association, small companies, big ones, local, international. But just thinking about government, Alessandra, and the, and you've worked in ministries, you've worked in international organizations, and you're in a national tourism organization now, so you've probably had more experience than you would have ever wished to gain in terms of how the machinery of government works, what the opportunities and obstacles are. One of my naive questions is particularly thinking about how Europe is seen from outside Europe. A lot of the reason why people come is our culture, in the biggest sense. So yes, our wonderful museums and sites, but all aspects of how we lead our lives. It's a fun place to be. So thinking about that appeal, there are ministries of culture, there's ministries of tourism, sometimes tourism sits inside a ministry of economics. You know the game, Alessandra, I don't need to tell you. But from my perspective, thinking about the supply side of tourism, our cultural assets are a very big part of that. Due to climate, we're going to have to be visiting places earlier in the morning, later in the evening. Perhaps it will not be possible to have open-air sites like the Acropolis or Pompeii open in the middle of the day in the summer if it's dangerously hot. So how do you see a path to collaboration between ministries of culture who are responsible for these extraordinary tangible assets and the people more responsible for influencing tourism flows and management and how dispersal happens? Do you see dialogue in that area? Do you see opportunity for that internationally, domestically? How do you see that working, Alessandra?
Well, if I had the solution and the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here today. I'll be probably selling my solution to the rest of the world.
Okay.
So the point here, I think, Tim, we have to, as I was mentioning before, we have to change perspective. Until we continue seeing us as an object of visitation, we lose sight on us, who we are, what we have. I'm going to be a little disruptive now, and I'm going to take advantage of this fantastic stage in Barcelona, because I want to go back to what I said before and what you were saying in the beginning of this second question. How do we involve communities? We don't buy them ice creams, no. But, for example, I'll give you an example of Roma, a very difficult city, right? Very difficult. Not only to please the Romans, to manage, you have this thing of 2,500 years living with the possibility of being modern, connected. I mean, people don't understand where there are areas when you walk in the center of Roma and you are just in between buildings. There are areas where the signal completely disappears, the Wi-Fi signal. Guess what? I mean, we don't even know. We have water running under the city. We have a subterranean city running. So Rome is unique, but people are slightly happier. Why? Because the current administration decided to, with the perspective of the Jubilee, to increase the number of public service. Something that for the Spaniards is a given. But for us, having a certain number of buses that are coming on time with an actual electronic panel that tells us when the bus is coming, having an app connected to it is wow. So did that change the feeling of being a Roman in Roma? Indeed. The city of Roma has done a program of, let's say, events. What you're saying, like the morning visitation of the certain archaeological site or the opening of the museum during the night is now becoming recurrent as an initiative, not necessarily targeting tourists. Let's remember one thing, Tim. Tourists are temporary citizens. Until we embed this vision in the way we do stuff, nothing really changes. We cannot, you're saying, how does preservation of cultural heritage dialogue with tourism? It doesn't. We know that. And in some specific municipalities or regions or whatever, they're able to create the dialogue for the timings of the openings and and let's say create special access, for example, for the cruise liners, that when they descend, they go straight to that specific museum, but that's different. That's a commercial endeavor. That's sort of a little bit of planning done by the technical people, the tour operators, the travel agencies, who have connections, who create this and that, but it's always a commercial endeavor. It's part of an offer, okay? When we're talking about policies, the main policy is that if you include the citizen, not necessarily of a city, but also of a smaller place, in your designing of the policy, you might come across very basic needs that, if satisfied, will make their life easier, therefore the tourist life easier as well. Because remember, a happy citizen means a happy tourist as well. And when you give the citizen the possibility of entering the same locations as tourists, maybe even at the same time, and give an alternative for a Saturday morning, for a Sunday matinee to go into a place, why not? Museums are not for tourists.
Sure.
Locations are not necessarily for tourists. Hidden tours are not necessarily for tourists. So it is important, once you maintain this equilibrium, it is important that we keep the focus and we never miss it. Not only because the citizen and the tourist, they're paying the same amount of money, so it's like commercially makes a lot of sense, but because you create that incredible ingredients that are unreplicable, that, as you said, define the experience. Because if I understood correctly, you say what I say. People don't come to Italy to go to the Colosseum or to eat pizza and pasta. They come to Italy to feel Italian, and they identify feeling Italian with an X amount of elements. Last but not least, the incredible operation that the Vatican State and the Kingdom of Spain, if you allow me, sorry, I call it the Kingdom of Spain because I say it in a regal term, has done for the visit of Pope Leo. Okay? Pope Leo, in his 8+ days, has created an unprecedented stage, if needed, for the beauty of Spain, for the organization of Spain, for the efficiency and the effectiveness. Now, do I want to go and see the Sagrada Familia now? Tomorrow. Right? So that was magnificent. But who was happy in the first place? The Spaniards. They were happy. They were proud. They had this feeling of, wow, the Pope is visiting us. So when I go to Barcelona and I want to visit the Sagrada Familia, I want to have a pinch of that. How do I define it? Undefinable. Now, if the city of Barcelona allows me in its setting to have the same experience, and so to visit in a certain way, and gives me an easy access, me, Alessandra from Roma, but also anybody from the city of Barcelona, that's when you've done your connection, and you don't need any policy to create the agreement. When you do that, this is when you create your cultural product, your experience product, and people are going to come out of it saying, wow, this was amazing. I am going to come back. I'm going to tell everyone. And Barcelona is super well organized, for example.
Thank you, Alessandra. And I'm anticipating that you will have to disappear like a fairy in about 5 minutes. So if you're not speaking at that time, please just wave and disappear, and we will remember you like the Cheshire Cat. You will be here. But thank you very much for joining us. But hopefully we'll bring you back in. Just to take that point about, this is our culture, and forgive a Brit talking about our, because we're still European, honestly. What we sell is what we like, right? London has a great theatre scene because Brits like going to the theatre, right? Not because tourists like the theatre. Tourists also like the theatre, but the reason why there's a really buzzy theatre scene in London is hundreds of years in the making. And that's true, replace theatre with anything you like anywhere else in Europe. The reason why it's there is because we created it, as Alessandra said. But we've got to think about how we can all participate in it. And to give my tiny little Italian insight of my enormous focus group of my friends in Florence, I always ask them, when was the last time you went to the Bargello? And they shrug and say, I guess when I was at school. Right? What's going on? This is an extraordinary building. There ought to be an aperitivo for everyone who lives in Florence every month. It would be brilliant. It's a great venue. It's fun. And you can go and have a look at extraordinary artwork as well. But we've somehow allowed things to become for tourists. What's going on? What happened? What are the mechanisms that will push back against that, but not in an aggressive way, in an encouraging way? How can we, as Alessandra said, the Notte Bianco, whatever it might be, that's going to work for the people who live somewhere. They're going to work during the day when tourists are visiting museums, but it's great if they can go late at night, early in the morning, whatever. So I think that residents first, in terms of how do we encourage broad participation in the long tail of cultural assets, not just the famous things, that in turn will drive the offer. It'll drive dispersal for tourism because those places feed off both domestic demand and visitor demand. So focusing on what would residents like to do will be a dispersal strategy, he said optimistically from the point of view of the travel industry. Yep. Do you want to add a note of skepticism to that, or do you think there's an opportunity?
It's an opportunity, but it's also a problem at the same time. What's the problem? The problem is a geographical one. When you follow the footprint of the tourists around the city, you can see that they obviously concentrate in some particular areas. That's why we start last year a program called High Density Areas, ERAS, Espais de Gran Afluencia, in terms to reduce the pressure of tourism in these areas. Mobility, flows, bicycle circulation, cleaning, and so on. But what was the central problem? Why, in this area specifically, the reaction of residents against tourism is higher? We thought it was because housing, or because pricing high, or because density, and it's true. But the real problem was more specific. It was symbolic. And that's the key point. These people perceive that this area no longer belongs to them. That's the key point. And why? Probably because specifically the commercial atmosphere, the commercial area, becomes more oriented to tourists than for residents. The Vaccary turns a souvenir shop. And that's a real problem. Well, there are many problems. But in this case, for instance, we know, according to our polls, that most of the residents in Barcelona never walk around the Rambla. And this is a defect of the city, because the Rambla is the heart of Barcelona. Then, that's why we are acting specifically in this, we focus on this commerce oriented to local people. We are using the tourist tax for protect local commerce. That's a paradox, that's a contradiction, because I am the commissioner for tourism, and my goal is that in the Ramblas, the number of tourists decrease as the number of residents increase. That's my goal, to reduce the number of tourists.
Alessandra, ciao, grazie. I know you've got to go.
Thank you,
Grazie
thank you very
tante.
much. I'm
Ci
sorry,
vediamo.
gracias. I'm sorry I cannot listen to the rest of it, and I promise you I will be soon in Barcelona to check all the beautiful policy initiatives that you're going to put into place.
That
But
you
I'm looking forward to having this conversation any other time. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you
Grazie,
for
a
the
dopo.
festival
Ciao.
to have me.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Okay, thank you, Alessandra. Let's stay. So we're going to try and save a little bit of time. So don't disappear. Jose Antonio was in the middle of something there. And there is another session. So the clock says one thing. We'll try and shorten it a bit. But it'd be nice to sort of close the the thinking there. So we started out talking about those high-density areas, the perception that you've taken over, that's not ours anymore. So there's a kind of subjective piece, but there's also some practical things you're doing. So do you want to get into that? The sort of practical ways that you're, and you described something, I think it was in Zagreb, which was very good fun. I'll let you go back to that.
Yeah, I was talking about commerce, but we have different policies in terms to better connect the residents with the tourism areas. I was talking about our program to protect local commerce, and we are using the tourist tax for recovery some local commerces. Probably the best example is Boqueria. I don't know if you know, Boqueria is very close to here. It's a market. It's my market because I live in the Ciudad Bella. It's my personal market, and every day I have to pass through hundreds of tourists. And this market more and more becomes a tourist shop. And we start a program in order to recover the original identity of a market, that is, to provide local food products and not fruits for tourists or juices. And these processes, small processes, a chirurgical wall, are very useful. For instance, we are now affording the problem with coaches. Barcelona has around 15 million tourists, 5 million cruise passengers, and 7 million day trippers. That's a lot, because as you know, we are very close to big destinations such as Costa Brava, Costa Daurada, Costa de Barcelona. Then we start a program called Bus 4.0, couch or bus 4.0, that allows us to distribute the flows out of the center. This algorithm is not using the data in real time, it's anticipating the problem, and this is the right way. This algorithm can prevent the congestion before that occurs. And we are using this model, for example, to reduce the traffic of coaches around the Sagrada Familia in 27% since this February. That's a lot.
And mindful of time, I think we can't possibly resolve all of the things we've opened, but maybe it's worth just referencing back to what we've heard this morning, because what you've just described is digital transition, tech literacy, skills training. That's not a tourism skill. It's how do you do traffic and flow mapping, right? So you don't, that's not the same as tourism and hospitality. So I think, when Andrea was describing the Tourism Academy, I was saying, how do you get things which are not tourism, but they are a necessary precondition for success if we're going to manage it. And I think that's a great example of that anticipated flow. There's a lot of data that we are gathering now, and we already have, which can help us with that. But I just want to sort of leave a couple of thoughts, and then maybe just a final word from you, and then we're done, and we'll catch up with a bit of time. What we've not got into is where the competence sits. So there's local, there's provincial, there's regional, there's national, there's EU. So from my perspective, there's a mapping exercise, because it may be that you need more help from here, or it may be you need here to disappear a bit and have a bit more authority to manage locally. And I think from an industry perspective, some people want, can we just have a solution at a national basis? And you go, no. Rural Spain's completely different from downtown Barcelona. So tourism is the classic example of you need to come up with a solution that suits the circumstances, but it's allowing that within an enabling framework that sits at an EU level. That's the game we're in. It's complicated, but it's a very dynamic one, and I think this has been a really good few hours worth of unpacking that. So I'm not going to say anything else. You say a closing remark, then it's back to Ivana. So anything else from you before we go?
Yeah, I completely agree. We have to collaborate with different levels of administration. For instance, we collaborate very closely with Diputació de Barcelona. We have a program in order to improve our sustainable activities called Compromís per la Sostenibilitat. And this is a program together, the regional and the local authority working together. Or, for instance, we are trying to increase the number of tourists who visit Catalonia. We want to do it. Now only 8% of tourists visit another municipality than Barcelona. Then we are collaborating with the rest of Catalonia in order to increase this percentage. Why? Because we want less tourism, and probably some rural areas or some cities, especially in winter, needs more tourism. Then we can collaborate together. Then I completely agree. We need different scales working together in terms with the same objectives.
So there's a sort of collaborative governance matrix to be determined. Thank you so much, Jose Antonio.
Thank you.
Good to
Thanks
chat
a lot.
again. Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you. Ivana, over to you.
A last-minute question from the audience, which is, I think it's been partially addressed, but it reads, following the introduction of bed capacity limits, did the destination experience a rise in rental and hotel pricing? And in your view, does this regulatory limit favor established accommodation providers?
Yeah, that's true, obviously. It's an economic principle. When you reduce the number of the offer and increase the supply, the result, obviously, is the prices increase, and that's true. But in our case, we are trying to find a mixed model. For instance, we protect the B&B offer in our city because we welcome luxury tourism, but at the same time, we think that the back paper is also welcoming in Barcelona.
Thank you very much.
Can I just respond to exactly the same thing?
Yeah.
So Barcelona is a very big convention center, so the MICE industry is huge here. And the MICE industry is much less sentimental than visitors, so it makes much more economically hard-headed decisions. So I think there's a good chance, you're right, you reduce that supply, hotel rates will go up, that's what happens. That will change the competitive environment for Barcelona when it comes to MICE. That should be an opportunity for elsewhere in Catalonia. Done right, done with the right connectivity, the fact that there's going to be fast rail, Barcelona Airport to Girona Airport, I think, in 4 or 5 years' time, that kind of thing is going to help. But that bit of the tourism industry behaves much differently from leisure, so make sure that's part of the mix as you do it. Because like opera singers, they book 3 or 4 years ahead, and if the prices are going up, they will make different decisions.
Yeah, completely agree.
All right.
Thank you very much, José Antonio.
Thank you.
Tim, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank
you
you
very much. What emerges clear from this discussion is that there is no single pathway towards tourism transition. Different destinations face different realities, yet many of the questions are shared. Questions about governance, sustainability, competitiveness, social acceptance, and questions about how tourism can continue creating value while remaining compatible with the needs of people and places. Thank you all for enriching this debate.